All right, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to Room DE. I want to thank our sponsor for this session, Prowler. Prowler is the leading open source tool for multi-cloud security best practice assessments, auditing, and hardening. It helps identify vulnerabilities, ensure compliance, and improves cloud security posture with a comprehensive checks and actionable insights. AWS recommends Prowler for its robust security and compliance management capabilities. I want to welcome to the stage Jarom Brown, who's going to talk about what's the worst thing that could happen if you share your AWS account ID. Welcome them to the stage.
Cool. Thanks, everyone. Good afternoon. So, like Zach announced, I'm going to talk about what's the worst that could happen sharing your AWS account ID with the world. Cool. So just a quick intro. My name is Jarom Brown. I'm a senior lead security engineer at Capital One. I work on the bug bounty responsible disclosure team. I also do it as a side hobby sometimes, which we'll see throughout the presentation a little bit. I'm a husband and a father of 4. Cool. So we're going to go through a few different things today. Hopefully, seeing as how this is the second to last presentation of the whole conference, people's brains might be fried a little bit. Hopefully this is going to be something where you can just kind of sit back, relax, and not have to think too hard. So I'm going to go through these different topics. At the end, just kind of talk about all of this. So it should be good. Cool. So to start off, so our account ID is secret. So going to Google, maybe the source of all truth, used to be the source of all truth, right? Came here and their AI kind of gave us a rundown on this. And so you can see from below the little cards, they pulled this from different blogs and posts and whatnot. But so from their perspective, account IDs aren't considered confidential, but they do throw in like a caveat there at the bottom. They're like, an attacker could use this information in other attacks, even if divulging the ID doesn't directly expose an account to compromise. So that's fair. I think that's a good call. But even better, earlier this year, Daggers put out a great article on this. The final answer: AWS account IDs are secrets. So if you haven't read this, definitely go out after this and read it, because it plays into a lot of what I'm going to talk about today, and with some inspiration for this talk. So it's a great post. Cool. So on to the fun part of this. So as I was thinking about this, and it's actually something I've been working on for the last few years, as different pieces of research have come out, I'm like, hey, that would be great for this tool. This would also be great. So just pulling from different places and trying to build kind of a database of different assets and information and being able to tie it all together. So the first one that I started working on, or that I pulled in when I was doing this recently. So if you didn't know, last year at Forward CloudSec, I think this is the first repo in the Forward CloudSec organization. I might be wrong, but it's the only one I know about. So it's an amazing repo. So Scott and team have been working on putting this together, finding account IDs of known vendors, of known companies that either publish it in their blog or their documentation, and you can clearly tie it back to that company. And that's important, because as you're going through, like, you could enumerate account IDs a number of different ways, but if you can't attribute them back to a company, then what good is that? The next, okay, and yeah, so as of Sunday night, I think the total number of account IDs that are in this repo are 378. So all of those are tied back to different companies. Back in 2021, Ben Britz put out some research which kind of started a chain, right? So a chain of research. And so I've seen this talked about several times throughout this conference and over the last few years. A great tool, great utility for finding account IDs. So at a high level, what this allows you to do is to take a public S3 bucket, run it through the tool, and it's going to spit out the account ID. So it's using wildcards in the policy and a bunch of other cool stuff, and it works great. So the only caveat with it is you have to have a public S3 bucket. So you have to know the name of the bucket or you have to discover it somehow. So that's kind of the tricky part. But luckily, if you're not aware of this tool, Gray Hat Warfare, it's a tool where they're going through the internet, I don't know, a bunch of different ways, and they are collecting cloud buckets and cloud storage names. So I think showing as of May 23rd, they're up to 321,000, almost 322,000 unique AWS buckets. And so, so what I did is I took all of these buckets, all the bucket names, and ran them through the tool. So as you can imagine, that would take a little bit of time, but I modified the script a little bit to be multi-threaded, run in parallel, and then I threw it into ECS and just spun it up to like 500 containers for a day or two, and then it was done. So that was kind of the fun part, just having it work and be done quickly instead of just sitting there and like doing it one at a time. So now I have it set up to where I can dump in a bunch of AWS account or S3 buckets, and it spits out account IDs at the end. So it's kind of cool. So joining those two tools together, right, I came out with 196,000, almost 197,000 unique account IDs. And so the difference in the number there is, see, there's 322,000 buckets and then close to 200,000. So there are a lot of account IDs that are tied to, some of them have maybe 500 buckets in one account. And so that's kind of, I was like, those numbers aren't quite off. What did I miss? But that's what's going on with some of that. Let's see. And so, so yesterday, Sam gave an amazing talk on this, and he walked through the whole process of finding the account ID of any S3 bucket. So this is different from Ben Britt's research. It's related, but it's different. Because now the bucket doesn't have to be publicly listable. It can just be the bucket name, and that's all you need. And so I'll get to that in a second. But with this, you can go through and you can either guess bucket names, you can generate them, you can, however you want to come up with them. You can get a list of names and you can run through those. And so what I did is, in the beginning, when I was talking about the forward CloudSec repo, those are a list of all known, like those are tied to companies. And so we could just randomly generate tons and tons of buckets and generate more account IDs, but at the end of the day, we're not gonna really have any way to attribute those back to companies. So what I did was, I do some bug bounty on the side, like I mentioned. I took all of the subdomains that I had for all the different companies, which I think ended up being close to like 2 million or something. And so from there, I ran them through a script. Because part of the SAMS tool is you have to send it through a VPC interface endpoint, and it has to be in the correct region. So the first step is to sort all of those into the different regions. And then from there, I spun up infrastructure to start scanning in each region. And I think I'm up to 1,100. It's up a little bit more. I think my US East instance is still running just because I had a lot more there. So the numbers climbed a little bit. I was hoping to be to 200,000 by the time I gave this talk, but I checked this morning because I hadn't seen any alerts and my script had died. So anyway, I'll be up to above 200,000. Hopefully before the end of the week. But so now that we have all our account IDs and we have all of them, the next step is confirming ownership. So I ran into a few problems with this, which I didn't realize there were problems until I ran into them. So I made the assumption like, hey, I have this bucket, subdomain.domain.com. Logically, it belongs to this company, right? And so I think I started going through some of this data at like 1 or 2 in the morning, so I got pretty excited. I was like, hey, this is pretty bad. Like I can write to their bucket, I can read everything, et cetera. So, and I sent off a few reports. So one of them, and the triager on HackerOne. So if you're not familiar with bug bounty is a. So I've been doing it for the last few years at my company. I'm trying to explain how to, if you don't know what it is, how to explain it. But it's another way to find vulnerabilities in your company's websites and your infrastructure assets and so forth. So anyway, so at HackerOne, this is where I submitted to. They have triagers who will go through and triage. And they're like, hey, how do you know it belongs to them? And I was like, oh, yeah. I think my initial thought process when I saw this was kind of in this order, like, oh, yeah, good call. My whole thought process kind of broken. And I was like, okay, and then how do we know? Like, how do we figure out, like, if this bucket actually belongs to them or not? Like, you can't go by name. How do I do that? So I came up, oh yeah, this was me before I submitted, and as I was thinking about like all the buckets I was gonna send in, and then afterwards I was like, okay, I gotta figure out like, is this just garbage research I've been doing, or can I make this make sense? So these are kind of the 4 rules I came up with as I was going through this. So I found a lot of buckets that were publicly listable, and they would just have a single HTML file, and inside the file it would say takeover POC by whatever the hacker handle was, and I'd be like, okay, that's obviously not the company's account number. So in my system, I had a way to tag the account ID and say some bug bounty hunter who never deleted the bucket after doing a takeover. And so I've kind of started going through some of those account IDs and weeding out the ones like that. The second thing that I've kind of come across is like, hey, does this account ID show up like maybe more than 5 or 10 times? And if it does, is it all the same company, or is it kind of a mix of different companies? And so I've seen that too, like the same bug bounty hunters, I guess he's just been all over the place or whatever. So I've been finding a few of those accounts and kind of throwing them out and say, hey, these are garbage, ignore them. And so the third one, the production grade, like how do you determine if this is like an actual AWS account? And so I used a tool, which you might already know, Quiet Riot. And so you can feed it an account ID, and it will give you back all of so it takes in a list of IAM roles, and it will test against those to see if they exist in that account. And so the accounts that come back with just 4 or 5 results, like I'm like, that's probably just a test account or like a bug bounty researcher's account. But the ones that come back with like guard duty enabled, like SSM, and it's a list of like 20 or 30 different things, I'm like, hey, this is probably legitimate. It's probably tied to a real company that cares about their stuff. And then the fourth one, which has been maybe more helpful, is I think over the last couple of years, as I do some of my automation, I look for references to S3, and so I'll pull those buckets out and I'll like get the account ID back, and I'll make a note like, hey, I found this bucket in this JavaScript file, so it's likely owned by the company, or it's owned by a company that this company trusts, so it would be of interest to them. Let's see. Cool. So I feel like we've seen the screenshot a lot this past conference, but it's like, what do you do once you have account IDs that you care about and you know that they're tied to a company? So you could even do this with your own company that you work at, like take all of your account IDs and run them through these different steps that I'm about to do, because someone else may be doing it for you in the next few months if you don't do it. But just take the account IDs, see if they show up in SourceGraph. See what, like they probably shouldn't show up there unless you're using that account for, I don't know, for things, right? And it's supposed to be there. So you can go through each one and make sure that what's there should be there. The second one, which I just mentioned, is if you're doing this against your own account, it maybe doesn't make sense, but if you're doing it as like bug bounty or something else, like you could run it through here and kind of get a better understanding of the account. And I guess I probably should say, even though it's probably understood, like I'm only focusing on account IDs that have bug bounty programs that want me to that I assume want me to be doing this type of stuff. I'm not just targeting random account IDs because I don't want to get in trouble. But so it's probably a good role to stick to. And then from there, you could, if you're adventurous enough, feed the roles that you find into an assume role tool like this one, and you might get lucky. What else? Another thing that I thought of doing with the account IDs, which in the previous talk by Daniel, he mentioned, I think it's Scott Piper's repo, where he has a list of AWS assets that are publicly exposed or publicly exposable. And so maybe running that account ID through a few different scripts like this. And what I did was gave a prompt to ChatGPT, and it spit out like a 100-line script for me that it worked on the first shot. So it's getting better and better, and it's a time saver in some situations. So cool. Let's see. So kind of just wrapping up. Like we all know, account IDs have always been treated as secrets, but that kind of breaks with some of this research, because now you can kind of, I think before you could assume like, hey, I haven't exposed my account ID anywhere, I don't have any publicly listable buckets, stuff like that, and so people don't know my account ID, so it's kind of a little bit of security through obscurity, but now you have to assume the opposite. Like now you assume, or if you have an S3 bucket in your account, you have to assume that people might be able to discover that bucket name, especially if you're using it to host a website or it's named like www.yourcompany.com. They could and probably will discover your account ID. So being proactive and making sure you're buttoned up and you don't have anything exposed that shouldn't is probably a good move right now. What else? What's my last one? And just because the account ID is known, you still have to misconfigure something on your own. It's not going to just magically, like you're going to be owned one day because you have your account ID out there in the world. You have to, there's the customer side of the responsibility model that we have to worry about. Let's see, I think, oh yeah, here's my super deep methodology here. Screenshot that. So yeah, nothing crazy, but this is kind of what I've been going through. Find an S3 bucket, get the account ID, see if I already know about it. If it's one I care about, test for misconfigs, and just keep going. So it's kind of a fun game to play, just seeing how many I can get. I think the goal is to eventually, I don't know what the goal is actually, but just to keep growing that list. And that's it. Yep.
All right, any questions from the room? All right.
Yeah, so the Quiet Riot repo that you listed on there made, I believe, 30K AWS accounts public in a text file. Do you think of ever sort of exposing that for the community to be able to leverage in any way?
Are you saying in that repo there's 30 account IDs?
Yeah, there's 30,000 accounts in the Quiet Riot repo
Okay.
that they have enumerated.
Yeah, I think I have seen that before. Trying to think if, like for me, I don't know if I would add it to my inventory just because I don't know who any of them are. It'd be nice to be able to put like a name to the face, similar to how the Forward CloudSec repo has it. But those could be interesting, maybe for research if someone else is kind of doing internet-wide or AWS-wide research. That would be a great starting point, but yeah.
All right, we got a question from the Slack. Have you asked the bug bounty programs to confirm your found IDs? Like you go to them and say, I think this is yours, is that correct? Did you get any response to something like that?
On this last one, I gave him the account ID. I was like, I told him after doing more research, I don't think this is yours, but this is the account ID that I found. Would you mind checking to just confirming my work? But for now, I'm going to close the report out just because, for those of you who don't know, you don't want to get N8 on your report, not applicable because your reputation goes down. So I closed that thing out quickly. But yeah, I did give them the account ID so they could check, and if they find something on their end, hopefully they'll come back and say, hey, yeah, good find. But yeah.
Okay. Any other questions from the room? All right, thanks our speaker.